Now we're talking about the EQ module within Neutron 2. It's a great EQ. And here I have the Neutron 2 that's on the drum bus pulled up. It sounds like this. We have the EQ active. That's bypassed. Now it's active. And we can see this great spectrum analyzer right here in the middle. In fact, this is called the spectrum view. At the top here, we have different parameters that affect the entire module. This is called the global area. Then down here at the bottom, we have the detail pane. This is where we can get some more detail and some fine control over these, in this case, the EQ nodes. We have everything that we would expect from an EQ. We have 8 different nodes, as well as a high shelf and a low shelf, and a high pass and a low pass. Now, if you are using Neutron 2 in a 5.1 or 7.1 configuration, you will see an LFE bypass show up in a bunch of different places. As we would expect, we can grab these nodes and change the gain, change the frequency. I can use the mouse wheel to change the Q, as well as these different handles. And we can see the parameters updating down here as well. We can change between different types of EQ. They sound different. And if we move over to a shelf, we can see different bands available to us. As well as a high pass, we have different slopes. We can deactivate or activate those bands down here at the bottom. Now, just like with pretty much any other parameter within Neutron 2, we want to reset it, we just double click. We can also zoom. We can zoom in, change the scale, also change the weighting. You can zoom in to frequencies as well. We have all this available to us. At the top, we have a soft saturation button. This is going to add harmonic saturation at the input of the EQ, very similar to what an analog style EQ is going to do. We'll get to masking in a video all by itself coming up soon. We also have learn. This is going to pick some frequencies of interest. It's not going to change the gain or attenuation. It's not going to change the Q for us. All it's going to do is say, hey, you probably want to pay attention to this frequency. Maybe you have some sibilance there. Maybe we have some rumblies there. But let's just see what this learn button does for us. It turns white after it's done. And it's also saying, hey, pay attention to 5.3 kilohertz, about 720 hertz. You get the idea. And if we want to reset the entire EQ, we can push reset. And we're done. Now I can also solo these bands or solo different frequencies. And I can do this by holding the option button on a Mac. So here is what band number 3 sounds like soloed. Again, just holding option. Or if I click somewhere else besides a node, I can audition that frequency. If I want, I can also fold away or hide those detail views and just get a big spectrum analyzer here. Now this EQ also comes with a dynamic mode. Now turning this on makes this EQ halfway between a standard static EQ and a multiband compressor. It allows the EQ to react to the incoming signal like a compressor does. And rather than just attenuating, say, 6 dB at 600 hertz, and this is static, and it's always attenuating that amount of information at that frequency, we can make this dynamic. So it only attenuates when a signal crosses the threshold. We can make it move and react to that incoming audio. Let's take a look at that now. We can turn on dynamic mode, and then we have the option of making this downwards or upwards. Downward makes this a downward compressor, which means it reduces dynamic range. We click up, this basically makes it an upward expander, and that increases dynamic range. Just like a compressor, again, we have a threshold and some visual representation of what's happening. Let's do downward compression to make this easy for right now. All right, so at the top here, we have this white line. And this is the entire EQ curve. It's the sum of all the nodes. So if I did something like this, we can see a couple different things. We can see the individual nodes with the different colors. We can see, again, that entire EQ curve in white. And we can also see that node number 3 isn't affecting the EQ curve at all. And that's because it's in dynamic mode with this downward arrow. So what do you think is going to happen when signal crosses that threshold? Like a compressor, when it crosses that threshold, we have compression, but only in that frequency. If I flip this around and boost, it does something different. Here we have affected the overall EQ curve, but again, when that signal crosses the threshold, we have downward movement or compression. We're reducing dynamic range. Now let's flip this to upward mode or expansion mode. This is pretty much the exact opposite. If we attenuate, we can see that we've affected the EQ curve. And what's going to happen when that signal crosses the threshold? It's going to boost this up. We have some great visual feedback of what's happening. We can see the signal is crossing the threshold, and we can see the gain reduction amount. Since we're in expansion mode, we are reducing or attenuating the signal. We can see the gain amount here. It's negative 15 or something like that. And that responds to where we move this node. And if we boost, we can see nothing is happening until signal crosses that threshold. Now we can see as that signal crosses, we're going to boost those frequencies and increase dynamic range. Now we also have the option of a sidechain input. Now by default, this node is looking at the internal signal, so what is going into this device, and it's only looking at the frequencies at which this node is placed. So right here, this node is looking at the 600 hertz coming from the drum bus because that's what it's on. And that is what's triggering the threshold. Now, if we turn this on, we can change that. So maybe we want the entire signal, not confined to a certain frequency, to trigger or to activate the detection circuit for this dynamic EQ. So right there, it's extremely powerful. We pick band 1, now the frequencies at 200 hertz are going to trigger the compression at 1K. Pretty flexible, pretty cool. We can go one step further. We can use a key input. Currently, it's the kick drum. The key input is available to us as an external source. So if I pick external band 1, that means the frequencies at 200 hertz coming from this kick drum are going to trigger the compression or the dynamic EQ of band number 3. We can pick all of the frequencies from the kick drum are going to affect and cause this dynamic EQ to have some compression. And it's a really interesting way to add movement and have different types of instruments play off each other. Some examples. Maybe we want the kick drum to duck a little bit of information in the bass. Or maybe we want the lead vocal to duck a little bit of information on the electric guitars or something like that. We can have this inter-plugin communication, which causes our mix to feel unified and like it's playing off each other, because it actually is. Last but not least, let's go into the options on the equalizer tab, and we can just show or hide the spectrum analyzer. We can show the notes that correspond to those frequencies. We can also change how this alt solo, this guy right here, the slope of that. And we're going to get into the masking meter when we talk about masking. And that is the EQ inside of Neutron 2. Next up, let's take a look at the compressor. I'll see you then.